The inquiry to ensure free and fair local government elections later this year is set to hear oral submissions this coming Monday. It is expected to publish its report next month. Now, to date, it has received no less than 3,000 oral and written submissions from the public. Joining us now for a perspective on the inquiry are Media Monitoring Africa's Thandi, as well as Democratic Alliance's Health Shadow Minister Siviwe Gwarube. Thank you both for joining us on the program this afternoon. Siviwe, I'll start with you. Now, the IEC has appointed former Deputy Chief Justice Dikgang Moseneke to lead this process to review whether the current conditions are conducive for holding free and fair elections later this year. Now, as the DA, do you have confidence in that process?
Look, Antlanga, good afternoon and good afternoon to your viewers. I mean, our view has been from the beginning that the IEC is ultimately the custodian of ensuring that we are able to roll out free and fair elections in the country, and that we should not necessarily be swayed by political arguments about why we should postpone the elections, but only by the IEC itself, if they are of the view that they can't guarantee free and fair and safe elections. And so we are confident in the process that the former Deputy Chief Justice is rolling out. We have, as a party, submitted our proposals and ways in which we can keep people safe when we go to the polls in October. And we're of the view that this is an important cornerstone of a constitutional democracy to be able to have frequent free and fair elections.
Now, Thandi, a lot has been said about this process, and it has received endorsement from political parties, including the EFF. Just speak to us about some of the considerations that have to be made, or rather the inputs that we are expecting, including the legal, socio-political, as well as the health and practical and any other relevant considerations here.
Well, you know, from MMA's perspective, one of the key issues that we're going to be dealing with in the lead up to these elections is disinformation, and the impact that disinformation has on the ability for citizens to make informed decisions when it comes to vote, or when it comes to voting day. So for us, the issue around disinformation and ensuring that there are safeguards in place to combat disinformation related to elections is what's going to be one of the most critical, because, you know, you can have all the correct processes and procedures and plans in place, but, you know, if you have that sort of intentional public harm coming from instances of disinformation, you know, that has a detrimental impact on voter turnout and in essence to whether we have free and fair elections.
Staying with you, Thandi, the public are very interested, and stakeholders are invited to make submissions in this regard. At this stage, what do we know about the process and who gets to participate?
Well, you know, as far as I understand, participants have been invited to give oral submissions, and MMA will be making a submission as well this week. So we do hope that the presentations and the participants that are included offer a wide variety of perspectives and deal with all the issues that are relevant.
Going back to you, Siviwe, what submissions will you be making, if all, as a party? And have you invited your members to also take part in these oral submissions?
Look, Kantlanta, what we did was a very extensive collation of the party submission that we submitted to the IEC, as you correctly pointed out in your introduction. Those were due, I think it was last week, Friday. And we've made a number of suggestions around essentially how should we keep voting stations safe. Why we've also made a very long and comprehensive argument around the constitutionality of simply shifting an election date and what that would mean constitutionally when we're looking at those considerations. We've also made some submissions based on some experts that we engage with around the fact that, you know, if we are to meet the targets of vaccinating about 300,000 people at the very least a day, unlike what we are currently doing now, we should be able to be in a position where at least South Africans, more than just 2 million South Africans, are able to be vaccinated and not inoculated against this virus. And so there's plenty moving parts here. There's constitutional considerations. There's the vaccine rollout performance. There is obviously the IEC readiness and some of the measures that they'll put in place And so we've tried to really, come from it from all various angles. But ultimately, as we've said, the IEC has an obligation, and they are the ones who are the custodians of this process to be able to guarantee those three things: a free, fair, and a safe election.
Now, the elections themselves are months away, but there are already concerns that, look, it's just not safe to hold these elections, especially amidst a third wave of infections. As the DA, do you share a similar sentiment, or do you think that these elections should indeed go ahead?
Look, for us, I mean, we've said, and we continue to hold this view that the world is changing, and the way that we used to do political activity before is not necessarily the way that we can do political activity now. And so it's incumbent on political parties to change the way in which they're engaging their supporters, in the ways that they're taking their message to South Africans. And so what we cannot have is a situation where we saw last week, where a political party would host thousands of people in essentially what is the province that is the epicenter right now of the resurgence of infections. That is deeply irresponsible. And so what we're saying is that as political parties, we too have a role to play in keeping South Africans safe, not just our supporters, but the country at large. And so there is an obligation on our side to be able to rethink the way in which we do political activity, but we can't essentially do something that is not provided for by the Constitution simply because political parties are unable to adapt and unable to evolve. I mean, that's not how we should be making these decisions. The rest of the world is moving on because they are essentially understanding that we've got to start to do these things in and around living with this virus. And so we've got to hear from the IEC on the constitutional considerations, but also the Department of Health has an obligation to roll out the vaccine at a far greater pace than they've been currently.
Now, Thandi, as a follow-up, just looking at the messages around COVID-19 and the preparations for these elections, are you getting a sense that people are a bit apprehensive about these kind of gatherings where people will be lining up to cast their vote?
Well, I think that there are a number of different factors that influence people's decision-making around lining up to vote. I think that people are hesitant about about the safety procedures and regulations that will be in place. But then again, you see people coming out in their thousands to march and to rally, and social gatherings don't seem to be too restricted. So you kind of have to ask yourself the question: well, is it people's? What are people deciding to do? And also, this is again where enforcement of regulations and restrictions need to actually take effect. Like we saw, we are seeing thousands of people gather, hundreds of people gather in marches without any precautions and any enforcement of the regulations. So, I think that if we see, or if that's anything to go by, then we shouldn't have an issue with voter turnout if the right messaging and the right information and the right safety procedures and protocols are indeed followed.
Speaking about this messaging, are you getting a sense that people are informed enough or properly educated about the guidelines and whether or not we will be continuing with these elections?
Well, I think that, because we are in this period of having this inquiry and kind of looking at all the different aspects and gathering information at the moment, there is, things are a little bit up in the air. But I do think that there, with anything, especially when it comes to elections and ensuring people are well informed, it is absolutely essential that we get accurate information, as much accurate information to every single person in this country as possible, and that is the responsibility of media, along with the IEC and other officials, to ensure that does happen.
Well, thank you both very much for your time. That's Thandi Smith. Also joining us for that conversation was the DA spokesperson, that's Siviwe Gwarube. She speaks on health matters in the party.